Hello. Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
How are you? It's good to see you.
Oh, it's so good to see you as well. And welcome back to the Grandma's March event. Oh,
Thank
it's
you for
so amazing.
having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you, especially now that the book is
I
is
know
already alive or born, let's say, right?
it really is. The last time that I talked to you, it was the first time that I had ever talked about this book project. And now it's almost here and it will be published in the world in July. So it's kind of
Wow.
crazy. It's been a journey.
Oh my God. It's quite a journey, but
Yes,
it's happening. It's happening. It's
it
happening.
is. Yep.
Oh. So I'm so happy to have you here, and good afternoon, everybody. Here from Tampa, Florida. We are in one more session, and actually, it's the last session of this season of Grandma's March 2024. And this year, Rebecca, every year, as you probably remember, I have a theme for the year, and this year the theme it is called "It is time to revive our roots." And ask ourselves, what did we do once we knew? So the idea is just to always reconnect to our roots and grandmothers and our ancestors. And also the last question, it is inspired in a poem by Drew Dellinger that is called What Did You Do Once You Knew? And basically is he wakes up at 3 a.m. in the morning and like with a dream that his great great grandchildren are asking him, what are you doing once you know everything that is going on in the planet, or the things that you are aware or being conscious. So that's kind of the idea this year. It's like, okay, let's reconnect to our roots again and remember where we come from and any connections to our grandmothers or ancestors or any stories that we know through our families. And then it's almost like, what is the legacy that we're leaving,
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
world. So that's something that you're bringing through your book, and I know you're doing not only the book, a lot of other things, amazing things that you do for women and for the society, for the community. So yeah, it will be lovely that we go like in that journey, starting from your roots and a little bit of who you are and where you were born or whatever you want to share, like a little bit of your story, if you had any connections to your grandmothers or any stories. And then we go up to today and all the amazing things that you do. You tell us about the book and what inspired you and any other things that you are also doing to impact. So
Okay.
sounds
That sounds
good.
great. That's a lot. And it sounds great. And I love
Okay.
this theme. It's such a
Yeah.
good theme too, because it's sort of the ancestral and then also, as you said, the legacy. I love that thinking.
Yeah, and I know it's a short time for a long story, but let's try
Yes.
to do like
That's
little
okay. We'll
pieces
go
of
right
it.
through it. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
sounds
And it's so good to
good.
be a part of this community, Monica. Thank you for
Oh,
inviting me
I
back.
love
I
having
love
you. Yes,
everything that you're doing. Who doesn't want to talk about grandmothers?
right.
I love it. So
Everybody gets excited about grandmothers.
I completely
Yeah,
agree. I probably have a little bit of grandmother envy because I think I shared with you, I only had
I
one
know.
grandparent in my
Hmm.
life. So
Yeah.
you know, two of my grandparents died before I was born on my dad's side. And then my maternal grandfather died when I was a few months old. So I had my mom's mom, who I was the most close to until I was about 9 years old. And she was, and still is, kind of this presence in my life and has been like a presence in my life more on a spiritual level. But felt very close to her. And when I knew her, she was extremely nurturing and caring and loving and just all the things that, a wonderful grandmother is. And I also, I'm a writer. I guess just a little bit about myself. I've been writing since I was about that age, writing stories, and it's always been kind of a calling for me. Something that I wouldn't say I love doing it, but I always kind of have had to do it. So especially through like adolescence and things, it was just like something I would do at the end of the day, just come home and like write in my journal and, just fill pages because I just had to get it out somehow. So it helped me to kind of experience the world. And I think, this story, I guess, um, that I've written that's now the first time that I'm kind of putting my writing out into the world. It's always been something that
Yeah.
I've done a little more privately, not professionally. You know, I took a different path like you, work in people and culture and other areas, and do a lot of advocacy for women, but have always kind of written on the side. And this is the first time that I was called to write a story, but the story has been with me for a very long time, since
I
I
love
was
it.
in my 20s. So the story itself has had kind of a gestation period that's been really long and interesting. I wrote the story before I became a mother myself, and then I
Oh,
went back
wow.
to it and kind of revised it as a mom, which is kind of cool process creatively.
I imagine.
Yeah. So, and I think, now you always see things more after the fact, which kind of relates to what you were saying in terms of, what do you do when you know? Um, and I think looking back, there's probably reasons why I was drawn to this particular story. And the story
Hmm.
is inspired by a group of grandmothers in Argentina who still today, in their 90s, and some of them are over 100, are searching for their missing grandchildren who were taken and reappropriated during the last dictatorship in the 1970s, late 1970s and early 1980s. And this group of women who I had the privilege of working with when I was in my 20s and getting to know, are so resilient and strong and tenacious in the face of like all of this terrible tragedy and grief that happened back in the 70s and 80s. And I think in retrospect, just kind of thinking about tying it back to my own story, my grandmother for me when I was younger was just always very, as I mentioned, kind of, maternal and caring and all the
Hmm.
great things and sweet. But there was something that excuse me, I think I understood about her that I intuited then, that had to do with resilience and kind of enduring through tragedy. And some
Yeah.
of that came through just the narrative of my own story and my own like personal heritage, which is that my grandmother, you contextualize what it was really like for her by knowing the facts. So I don't really know this. I only knew her as a young child, but I
Okay.
know that she and her mother and her sister had some financial hardship. She lost her father, and so she worked. In a time when working and being like an educated working career woman of her generation was not as common, but she did. And she, geographically relocated her family to work. And then she also had a pretty significant personal loss, which is that she lost a child, which was my uncle, my mother's brother, when he was young, like 14. And so I might not have known all of that as a child, but I kind of sensed and just saw her as a presence that was like, had an inner strength that was really, um, just kind of the ability to endure through tragedy and still maintain this kind of, soft, approachable, very like civilized kind of way about her with poise and all of these things. So in retrospect, whether or not that has anything to do with that, I think maybe there were attributes about, the grandmother's work that were something like in a nostalgic way that
Yeah.
I was wistful about. But I was just so impressed by this group of grandmothers. So I don't know. Can I share? Should I share a little bit about
Yes,
this story?
please. Yeah, 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 yeah. Anything you want to share about this story because it's amazing. And how did you get in contact with it, or however you want to?
Okay, and it's kind of how we connected too, because I think first started
Right.
to talk about
Yeah.
this book about
It
grandmothers.
is true about the grandmothers. That's
I
the way
know,
we
I
connect.
love it. I love it. The whole community. So it's been
Yeah,
great.
I
So the
couldn't
book,
be. So
I
yeah.
wrote the book. It's called The Disappeared. It's historical fiction and it's a dual timeline, but it's inspired by the grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina. And there was a dictatorship in 1976. In March of 1976, there was a military coup that began this period of about 7 years of a dictatorship, during which time the the military government was really, kind of trying to get a hold on some civil uprising and guerrilla warfare and things that were taking place because of a lot of just political factions in the country. And there was quite a bit of overreach during that period. And some human rights groups will estimate that about 30,000 people in Argentina disappeared, which is how they were referred to at the time. And what that meant in reality was that they were captured, often held in clandestine detention centers, often subject to torture, and then killed. But there was systemic denial of their whereabouts throughout that process, which created this kind of state of real fear and terror for the families who had no closure and no answers. And so it was in this kind of climate of fear that a group of women stood up. It was mothers, of course, and they want to know where their children are. So they stand up and kind of risk their lives. And that group that formed was the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo. And they wore white headscarves, and they gathered in the Plaza de Mayo every Thursday and held pictures of their missing children, and tried to circumvent some of the restrictions at the time, but definitely were, in their own way, revolting against the powers that be at the time. But because of the demographic of the people who were taken, which is generally the majority of whom were in their like 20s and early 30s, not all, but most
of them, yeah.
Yeah, and they some were young parents that had young children. A number of them were pregnant women who were maybe in early or even later stages of their pregnancy, and the pregnant women, which we now know were approximately 500 or so, were they gave birth in prison, and then the babies were given up for adoption or kind of reappropriated by the military dictatorship to families who adopted them, sometimes in good faith and sometimes with full knowledge of where they came from. And so those children were my generation. So when I went to Argentina, I was in graduate school. I wanted to study women's studies. I've always been feminist and very interested in gender equity, gender studies. And I went to study this women's group who I, hadn't known about before, and was working with their grandchildren. So often, and they were all my age. I was born in 1977, so that we were contemporaries, and a number of them had started this identity archive. Many of them were children who were left behind when their parents were taken and their mothers were pregnant. And so they were in search of a sibling somewhere in the world.
Right.
And they created this identity archive. And the purpose of the identity archive was to gather information about the disappeared at a much more intimate and human level for the children, the adult children who would someday be found and potentially reunited with their biological families. So they were collecting information through interviews with the biological family members of the disappeared about things like, what were their favorite sports teams? What were their favorite foods? How did they meet? What did their laugh sound like? Very intimate, like personal details that if you were learning about your biological identity, you might ask about your parents rather than just,
Oh, got it. I wonder if that's me. Like,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, who am I? What did they think of, their children? What did they think of what are the stories that go along with the history of it? So it was very emotional work watching what they did, but it was also inherently hopeful because they were doing it for, people who would be found someday. And so that was who I worked with. So many of the people that I worked closely with there were looking for a sibling, and a few of them were adult children who had been reunited with biological families. So it was just incredibly emotional work. And I was 25 at the time. And I was living in New York City. I came back to New York, and I just felt like there weren't enough people for me to talk to about my experience because there wasn't a frame of reference. And unsurprisingly, it's an under-taught moment in history in the United States. And I had gone through, just, I would say, a pretty ordinary education, experience in the United States, but I had lived, overseas and in Western Europe for a couple of times. And, I was doing a master's in international relations. So I thought even that I might have a little more context on it. And my dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he was in Vietnam for about 15 months when he was younger, and so I had some context as to military history and in the United States, and I wanted to learn more about it because, of course, the United States was involved in Operation Condor, and I didn't know very much about that at all. So I started to do all this work when I got back, and I wrote a thesis on it. But then I just it just sat with me. It was still there, and
Wow.
the way that I explore things like that, has always been through writing. So I just started to write, all different points of view on this story. I started to write about the grandmothers who had told me their story. And then I also started to write about just the point of view of an adult child who finds out potentially that, the parents that had raised her and
I'm not.
love her, what would that feel like to even have that possibility come to you, that you might have to question what everything and so that's how the story came to be, and it was completely inspired by the work of the grandmother. So
Wow. No, this is amazing. So tell me a little bit more about those conversations with those who, like when you went to Argentina and you really met some of them. Like how was that experience, that connection to, their emotions or the stories, a little bit of what, yeah, you felt and how was that?
amazing. I mean, the
Mhm.
grandmothers that I had the privilege of
Mhm.
sitting in on interviews with, who
Mhm.
could talk so openly, and with such vulnerability about these experiences that at that point had happened 25 years ago. They were celebrating their 25th anniversary the year that I was there, and so of course there was emotional detachment from it, but the experiences that they described, and the work that they did, just tying back to what we were talking about a moment ago, to be able to kind of endure through this tragedy, to focus on getting like an outcome and really getting something done, whether it's just in general as women, when you think about like providing or being resourceful or things like that. But this was the highest level of just like practicality in getting like what they're looking to get done, which is to find and identify their grandchildren,
Wow.
in the face of complete like obstacles in every direction, and also just the worst tragedy that you can think of, which is losing a child.
Mm.
And so like hearing their stories about it was just, I was in awe. I was just filled with wonder, and still am. And I just have so much reverence for what they did. So just a couple of examples of things that I
Yeah.
think, are really, um, lend themselves to like, what do you do once kind of theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things so first there was a differentiation between the mothers and the grandmothers. So the mothers, as I mentioned, they're looking for their children, and they were not afraid to, well, I'm sure they were afraid, but they stood up against, the military government with everything on the line. If you think about, someone took my child, I'm just all out now. I need to have answers. But the nuance of being a grandmother and having a grandchild that either you were caring for because it had been left
Mhm.
behind, and or you were looking for them, kind of changes the whole approach, where now you have to think about, how do I negotiate that, or how am I going to find that child and prove that that child is mine. And so you're kind of like
Wow.
entering the whole situation with a different approach and a different level of, just a totally different approach. So that like differentiation was really interesting to me too, and it was strictly based on whether or not they had a grandchild that they were looking for. But then one of the big challenges in the beginning, in the early days for the grandmothers, was that they did have to. This was like the 19 early 1980s, when paternity testing with blood was like just beginning to be something that was
I was
mainstream
gonna
commercially
ask that.
available. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
so there was no way to say, you could say this child, okay, I've
Yeah,
seen
how
this.
can you prove it?
Right.
Yeah.
And even if they looked exactly like your daughter or your son or whatever, um, how do you prove it? And then, which they did. So they partnered, they reached out, and really were able to have um, just great strides on an international human rights like
Mm.
support level,
Mm.
and still have, where they reached out to geneticists. They had testing that was done that was at the
Wow.
time breakthrough advancements.
Oh, it
Um,
gives me goosebumps. Wow.
Yeah, you weren't able to, prove that relationship without the parents' DNA or the parents' blood until the
Right.
grandmothers worked with this Dr. Mary Claire King, her name is, from Stanford, and she did human rights work with them, and they created this test using, interestingly, mitochondrial DNA, which we all have, but we only inherit it from our mothers, and it's highly variable.
Oh,
So
really? Only from the mothers.
we only
Okay.
get from our mothers, and Dr. King was able to kind of exploit that genome in particular to show that a child was related to its maternal relatives, so its maternal grandmother or any maternal relatives, and that was how they proved it. Of course, the other major obstacle that they faced, which was partially publicity and partially logistics, was how do you get a sample from an adopted child who is living with a
I know.
right? So they had to navigate that as well, which was more on the legal front. They also navigated a number of other things that were, really tremendous pieces of history in terms of, there were amnesty laws that protected members of the military after the dictatorship so that they weren't persecuted for their war crimes. But there were a couple of loopholes in some of those laws, one of which was kidnapping. And so they were able to work with lawyers, federal judges, the federal judge who I had the honor of interviewing when I was in Argentina, who ultimately overturned the ruling of one of the amnesty laws, was showing that if you were guilty of kidnapping, of saving a baby's life, but you were protected from taking the lives of the parents, that was just a paradox that that didn't sit legally, and so they were able to ultimately overturn those laws. They weren't ruled unconstitutional until like the early 2000s. 2005 was the last one. So it took years. And so I think just, when you ask what it was like, seeing these women 25 years after the fact, now it's been almost 47 years. And they just keep going. It's like every
That's
obstacle, which is
unbelievable.
it's such a like feminine trait, I feel
It,
like, to
it
keep
is true. Yeah.
we have to deal with this, and this is like a big mess, but we're going to figure it out, and we're going to get the next thing done that we need to do.
Yes.
And with poise and grace and this strength that was like
Yeah.
so deep seated, that didn't come out, and it couldn't have come out as like aggression or anything like that, because that was part of even just their demonstrations when they had vigils, that part of it was, we can do this because we're women, and we're not we're not like
Yeah. It's not
antagonizing.
like they're going with guns or, doing, yeah, things. They
But
just want
it was really
in
like the
peace.
husband stay home, right? We
Yeah.
don't need that.
Right.
We just need to
Yeah. Yeah.
find our, yeah.
Not in
So
a violent way. So, yeah, I love it.
exactly. But it was a
I love
strength, like
it.
a fortude that was even
Yes, of
stronger than if,
course.
yes. Yeah.
And not only that, but also like the strength and the power of getting like all of the women together. Because if just one, not, but it's like all of them. Like,
I
yeah,
think
when
that's
I,
it. And working together in that way, which of course, that common thread for me is like still in other
yeah,
areas of the work that I do. I love the whole
yeah,
concept of bringing women
yeah,
together and,
yeah.
working together to get something done. And I think, with the evolution of writing this story, but also just in life, motherhood is something I think that triggered, at least for me, triggered that, where it's, you become a mother and you suddenly realize like, we have a universal experience. I know there's no one universal experience, but like you're so connected to other
Oh,
women
oh,
in
yeah.
this way that when you're younger, it's like you feel like you had the wool pulled over your eyes or something. But it definitely brings women together in that way. So
I love it. So yeah, I know like I want to be mind of time. Just asking about the book. So the book is a novel. Just tell a little bit about like the book and also where can people get it. I'm gonna share your website, but yeah, just a little bit. So
thank
I need to
you.
read it. I haven't read. I confess, but I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna read it because this book has been part of all this. This also my project. So I love it. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's been a labor of love. I absolutely love it. It comes out July 30th, but you can
Okay.
pre-order it now anywhere that books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, IndieBound, which is all the independent bookstores, and so it will be available wherever you buy books. It's called The Disappeared, And
Mhm.
again, it's a dual timeline story. The story takes place partially in Argentina in 1976 under the dictatorship, when a young mother, Lorena, is taken with her husband by the paramilitary in the middle of the night, and she has some dangerous secrets. And her 2-year-old son is left behind with her mother, Esme. And so Esme is left with no answers. There's no record of the arrest. And she goes out in search of her daughter while she's caring for her grandson. And she joins together with some other mothers who are in the same situation, reluctantly at first, and you kind of carry through her journey. And then the contemporary storyline is about a young woman who is confronted with the possibility that she may have a biological brother in Argentina, a place that she has never been, and
Wow.
she can find out whether or not that's the case pretty easily by taking a DNA test. But in order to do so, she would have to confront some things with her adoptive parents that could be very risky, and she's not sure if she wants to do that. So the two storylines intertwine, of course, and you'll find out more when you read it. But it's
Yeah.
a story about identity and family secrets and motherhood, and mostly about a group of mothers and grandmothers who endured for decades and continue to endure. I mentioned about 500 cases of babies or children who were taken along with their parents that we know of that are recorded missing. The grandmothers, in reality, as of today, have found and identified 137 of them.
That's
So
amazing.
now they're all our age, they're our generation, and they
Yes.
do not have doubts about their identity. So anyone can go on the grandmother's website at any time if they ever think that they are doubting their identity
Of
or don't know where they come
course.
from.
Yeah.
There's also a national genetic data bank in Argentina, thanks to in large part to the work of the grandmothers, where genetic data is stored for anyone who has doubts about their identity to test and see if they're a child of a disappeared parent.
Wow. What is the website? Just curious.
Yes, it is. I'll have to drop it in the chat here.
Okay.
I have it for you.
And I will
It's
share it.
okay. I'll drop it in the
That's so
chat.
interesting because I love that your book has also purpose. It's like whoever reads the book, imagine if it is. I'm just like imagining here. Imagine if it is one of these kids, and just I don't know, magic can happen through your book, and
I
people
mean, that was
can.
really the impetus
Yes.
for meeting with them was like, how do I tell this story? Every
Yeah.
American, the North American person that I spoke to was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, this cannot be. I need to tell you about
Wow.
this.
It's like I wasn't even thinking because it's like, oh, the story is beautiful, but it even has a purpose. Like you never know through the book, people can get, yeah, inspired just,
That would be the dream of my heart if that
I
happens.
know,
Anyway, just
imagine.
to
It's like I was
find your
reading your
story.
book and went into the website, which I'm just also included it here. You never know, this session can inspire somebody
Mhm.
out there and can
Absolutely.
help and support. So wow,
And the world
that
has
is,
changed since
I
1976. It
know,
could
I
be anywhere in the
know.
world. So
You
I would love
never
to bring
know.
more attention to the work they're doing and awareness in any way,
Wow.
even if it's just this is a small fiction story, in the United States, but maybe it
Yeah, right.
eyes
Yeah,
against
yes, it can get out there. And I
yeah.
also want to share, of course, your website so people can get to know you better and they can find more about the book and everything about Rebecca. Is that?
Thank you.
And yeah, I shared already, I guess. Is
Oh,
that what
thank you,
you're
thank
doing it
you.
there? Yeah.
Yes, thank you
When I
so
had
much.
it. So yeah, so please, everybody, just buy the book, get it, get to know Rebecca. She's amazing. She does much more than just a writer. She's an amazing leader, an amazing activist with all women and in the community with all the amazing things that you do. And yeah, we work together in many projects in
I'm very
around
fortunate to
the
be able to do
continent.
some of those things with you, Monica. So it's been
No,
it's
I
been an
love it.
absolute pleasure and all labor of love. So
Oh, no.
thank
Thank
you
you
for
for joining. Really, thank you for being part of this space and bringing your story, your book. I wish like this everybody buys it and
aw,
really it's like such a blessing to have you in my life. And I know we don't see each other too much, but always that I connect, it's like, oh, this is so good. Yeah.
I
So
feel the exact same way. I feel the
yeah.
exact same way.
And the
So
best is that we're in the same city. And yeah, so yeah, such a blessing. And I'm so happy that I didn't read a little bit about your bio, but it's important that everybody knows that, yeah, Rebecca really is somebody that she comes from a graduate program in international affairs, like she said, New York. School University in New York City, the research she conducted for the master thesis with the identity of the grandmothers, Archive of the Grandmothers at the University of Buenos Aires, leaded or inspired into this book. And she works as a human capital executive and serves as a board member and sponsor for various organizations supporting professionals and economic advancement of women. And she's also a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, the Florida Writers Association, and the Center for Fiction. And she lives in Florida with her beautiful family. So keep writing many stories. And yeah,
thank you, Monica. Thank you. It is so great to see you again. And I
great
look
to see
forward to
you.
seeing you soon. Have a great time next week.
Thank you. And you
Okay.
too. Have a great evening. And thank you for joining. And thanks
Okay.
everybody. Yeah.
Thanks,
Just keep
Monica.
keep watching for the book and buy it, everybody, in July. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.